Picture this: Boston Harbor, December 16, 1773. A group of men, disguised as Mohawk Indians, are about to do something that will change the course of history forever. This isn't just a story about tea. It's the story of how a protest sparked a revolution. This is the story of the Boston Tea Party. So, how did we get here? It all started with money and power, as these things often do. The British government was deep in debt after the French and Indian War. Their solution: tax the American colonies. This didn't sit well with the colonists. They had no say, no representation in the British Parliament that was making these laws. The famous cry, "No taxation without representation," echoed through the streets. First came the Stamp Act in 1765, taxing all paper documents. The colonists protested fiercely, and it was eventually repealed. But Britain didn't give up. Next up were the Townshend Acts, which taxed goods like glass, lead, paint, and, you guessed it, tea. Once again, the colonists organized boycotts. They refused to buy British goods. This pressure worked, and Parliament backed down on most of the taxes, except for one: the tax on tea. Why keep the tax on tea? It was a power move. The British government wanted to make one thing crystal clear: they still had the right to tax the colonies. This set the stage for a major showdown. Entered the Tea Act of 1773. Now, this one is a bit tricky. The act didn't actually impose a new tax. Instead, it gave the struggling British East India Company a monopoly on the American tea trade. This meant they could sell their tea directly to the colonies, making it cheaper than even smuggled Dutch tea. The British thought this was a brilliant move. The colonists would get cheaper tea, the East India Company would be saved from bankruptcy, and Britain would still collect its tax. A win-win-win, right? Wrong. The colonists saw right through it. They weren't just angry about the price of tea. They were furious about the principle. By buying this cheaper tea, they would be accepting Britain's right to tax them without their consent. It was a trap, and they weren't falling for it. In cities like New York and Philadelphia, colonists successfully turned away the tea ships. But in Boston, the royal governor, Thomas Hutchinson, was determined to see the tea unloaded and the tax paid. He was a staunch loyalist and refused to let the ships return to England. The ships, Dartmouth, Eleanor, and Beaver, were stuck in the harbor. And the deadline to pay the import duties was fast approaching. The tension in Boston was at a boiling point. On the night of December 16th, thousands of colonists gathered at the Old South Meeting House. The leader of the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams, declared that the meeting could do nothing more to save the country. This was the signal. Suddenly, war cries erupted. About 100 men, many from the Sons of Liberty, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians to conceal their identities. They marched down to Griffin's Wharf, where the 3 tea ships were docked. The mood was serious, the mission clear. For 3 hours, they worked silently and efficiently. They hoisted 342 chests of tea from the holds of the ships, smashed them open with axes, and dumped every last leaf into the Boston harbor. That's over 92,000 pounds of tea, worth nearly $2 million in today's money, all floating in the water. It was a powerful, symbolic act of defiance. It wasn't a riot. It was an organized protest. The protesters were careful not to damage any other property, even replacing a padlock they had broken. When news of the Boston Tea Party reached London, King George III and Parliament were outraged. They saw it as a direct challenge to their authority. Their response was swift and harsh. They passed a series of punitive laws known as the Coercive Acts, or as the colonists called them, the Intolerable Acts. These acts closed the port of Boston until the tea was paid for, restricted town meetings, and gave more power to the royal governor. They were designed to punish Massachusetts and make an example of it. But instead of crushing the colonists' spirit, the intolerable acts did the exact opposite. They united the colonies against Britain. The other colonies saw what was happening to Massachusetts and realized it could happen to them next. They rallied to Boston's aid, sending supplies and support. This shared sense of injustice led to the First Continental Congress in 1774, where delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met to coordinate their resistance. The Boston Tea Party was the tipping point. It escalated the conflict from a debate over taxes to a full-blown crisis of sovereignty. It showed that the colonists were willing to take drastic action to defend their rights. Less than 2 years later, the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord. The fight for independence had begun. So, the next time you brew a cup of tea, remember the Boston Tea Party. It was more than just a protest over a beverage. It was a bold declaration of freedom that helped shape a nation. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history fascinating, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that shaped our world. See you in the next video.